after getting through that debacle. Thank you very much. We're a team Big Old Tree, in case you forgot. So as we kind of started to talk about, we were the first and apparently the only group to kind of try and tackle the issue of mental health. Mental health, of course, a very wide scoping issue that affects a lot of people, and there's a whole mental health awareness month about it. So there's a lot of things we could have gone into. At first, we wanted to try and tackle the issue of social anxiety, and as we got further into it, we realized we weren't quite grounded in anything. We were kind of trying to go through our own experiences. And after some strong advice, after some strong advice, we decided to go more of an angle of grief. I think once we took the angle of grief, we were more focused, and we were able to focus around the idea of the five kind of cycles that you go through, the five emotions that you deal with as you go through grief. So I guess our game is meant to be an immersive, atmospheric, kind of abstract sort of thing you go through and experience you walk through. If you've heard of a visual novel sort of game, that genre, I think our game sort of invokes that sentiment. Very much sort of, even just the menu itself, sort of atmospheric, abstract as we kind of go through. So if you just want to go into the game and just kind of walk around the space for a little bit. Essentially what our game is, it's 5 terrains, and each terrain is the same shape, but has slightly different colors, slightly different lighting, and slightly different sounds. And what happens in each terrain as you walk around, walking around is just exploration. You kind of get to experience the world, experience the graphics that we have, and again the sounds. As you're going around, you might come across some sort of landmark. So in this case, it is a log cabin. And there are 2 specific events that you could come across. There's another one, a big old tree, as our variable is called, so that's where our name comes from. And there was meant to be a third event as well. We didn't quite have time to program that in. Now, essentially what happens is you, in this first terrain, you're meant to represent a mindscape. So what your mind might be perceiving as in a certain mental state in one of the stages of grief. So in this case, you start off in the stage of denial, kind of neutral tones, almost a numb experience. There's not a lot kind of going on, very, very bland. And you would experience an event. So you go to the cabin and you experience something, and then you go right back to the terrain, but it looks slightly different colors, different tones. And now you're in a different mental state, different stage of grief. And the second one you would go to would be anger. Then you go into a stage of depression, you would go into a stage of bargaining, and then you go into a stage of happiness or acceptance. And the way we structured the game was you always start back in the center of the terrain and you go walk around again. And you can choose which event you would like to go to, and each event will always be a similar sort of experience, just you experience it through a different lens of emotion. So you would go to the cabin that you might have seen earlier, and you would talk to a family member. And you would talk to a family member about the traumatic event you went through, which is the death of a loved one. And that was kind of the background story to this player-controlled character. And you would talk to a loved one through the lens of denial, through the lens of anger, through the lens of depression, et cetera, et cetera. Or the other event, you would go and talk to a friend, and you would kind of experience talking through with them about that experience in the lens of denial, depression, all those sort of lenses of emotions. Our intended audience, as we were developing just the player-controlled character, we imagined they would be somewhere around a 15-year-old, kind of the adolescent teenage years, where you might be going through a lot of these mental issues, not necessarily going through stages of traumatic grief, but you might be experiencing some sort of level of depression, sadness, anxiety. And the idea was for them to play through this game and maybe distract themselves from their own experiences, try to come to some sort of catharsis through the events in this, because it is a very cyclical game. You eventually get to the acceptance level, and we try to make a very catharsis event happen. However, we also intend for people of similar age to play this who might not have been going through those sort of experiences, who might not have gone through those motions before, and just have an avenue through which to experience them and to kind of try to understand them and try to build a sort of empathy for them and try to be more sensitive to those topics if they play through this game. People that are going through traumatic experiences, especially if they have gone through the death of a loved one, might find this game very relatable, and they might find it a good distraction, as kind of I said, a good catharsis. So again, each event has just kind of a text dialogue. In the case of the cabin, you're always talking to your mother. When you're very angry, you get very upset with your mother. She's just behind the door, and the idea is that she's knocking on the door and trying to get you to come down and talk at the wake for your younger brother, who we decided was the loved one that had passed away. And in this case, you get very angry and upset with your mother, and it kind of turns into an irrational sort of anger that more kind of turns into yourself. And then the idea is that would very much lead into the next step of grief, which would be depression. And the next event, if you choose to go visit the family in the depression terrain, in the depression mindscape, it would be a very isolated experience. Your mother would leave very quickly, and you'd be left alone with your own thoughts, and you'd be left alone with your own feelings, and it would be very melancholy, very sad, of course. Eventually you get to the catharsis, you get to the end, final one, and you have a nice moment with your mom. She tries to understand what you're going through and tries to build you through it. Again, as you kind of go around, you can see the total differences, the total shifts in each landscape. Yes. And as we go through, we try to put in some sound effects here and there. What we wanted to also express is that the third event was meant to be, there is a lake on our terrain, and there is a dock, and you would be able to go onto the dock and sort of be isolated by yourself and kind of be alone and experience your emotions on your own. There wouldn't be a lot of dialogue text. It would be a lot of sound variations, sort of if you're angry, of course a lot of drums, things to make it kind of obvious what emotions you might be experiencing. And that place would be a place of solitude. It would be a place to kind of take a break from the game, to kind of just let it wash over you. And then you would go and still go into the next stage, the next terrain. Once you get to the last terrain, the catharsis, the acceptance, the happiness level, once you finish that event, you are taken right back to the menu screen that you saw right at the beginning. Something you probably might have noticed is that you cannot experience every event in one playthrough. So the game is meant to be played through multiple times. Also, it's meant to signify a larger metaphor. When you're going through the stages of grief, it is not just as simple as easy as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Oh, hey, you're accepted. You've gotten through it. It's a continual, ongoing process that's always evolving and changing with every person. People experience things differently. People go through those different experiences differently. And we wanted to sort of have a metaphor where you're continually going through this, continually going through catharsis, and continually going back to the cycle of grief. I want to pass it off to our art director to kind of talk a little bit about that.
All right. So I'm Sophia. I'm the artist for our team for Big Old Tree. And the way we approached this was we intended to have the same terrain for each mindscape that the player is experiencing, because people experience, as he said, each stages of grief very differently. People don't have to cycle through the exact order that people tend to believe the stages of grief pass through. People can skip stages, and the reason why we have multiple playthroughs is so you can experience it from different angles and be able to understand what some people might be going through even if you don't. We also wanted to talk about people who have experienced some sort of grief or struggled with mental health in the past. To remember that these events are only temporary, so even in a stage of anger or depression, it's always able to get out of that dip, and nothing is permanent in this game. So if we were to develop further, it would be a wonderful way to start helping people manage to cope with situations where they feel it's inescapable, or it's really just rough to experience an event. So, yeah.
I think I'd like to wrap up just talking about kind of what we would have wanted to implement further into the game. I think eventually we'd want to implement where one choice at the beginning of one kind of mindscape would influence the events that happen next. In this case, if you go to the cabin at first, you experience that won't influence or won't change anything that you experience later. You just kind of get to experience it, and that's it. You get to choose that experience for yourself. Ideally, we'd like to make it so the player can choose to go and isolate themselves at the lake, at the dock, or they could choose to go talk to friends or family, and they could choose to go talk to one or the other, and use that as maybe a coping mechanism rather than just experiencing the emotion. However, right now we just want to put the power in the hands of the player, and right now they are choosing to experience this emotion through this lens.
Why the name?
Are you talking about the team name or the name of the
big
game?
old tree.
Big old tree.
That was
Oh, so one of the landmark that you go to if you want to talk to a friend is a giant tree.
So wait, big old tree is your game name?
no, that's our team name.
Sorry, the name of the game is actually Project Mindscape. The fact that each terrain is a different emotion in Mindscape is the center of the game.
Okay, so, but just hear this, right? You're somebody who's going through the 5 stages or whatever stages of grief. How would I ever know in the market to get your game with that name? I mean, that name doesn't attract, I mean, I have no, your name has to be able to attract me so that I can know what the game's about.
Okay, well, so there's a lot of examples of games with names that don't exactly reflect what they're about, and I feel like Mindscape is a good reflection. If you put it on a platform like Steam or some other kind of PC platforming console way to access games, you just tag it with a certain tag under genre. What are some tags?
Visual novel.
Yeah, visual novel, kind of psychological adventure, and you can tag it in that way. So I feel like mine does kind of reflect it, or the name reflects the idea. But if that is an issue, then we could just tag it on a place like Steam with, you know, these different tags that make it available.
So I think I understand how it could help someone build empathy for the grieving process if they haven't experienced it themselves. But I'm wondering if you could explain how you think this game would help someone who might be in the middle of the grieving process. That's what I didn't quite understand.
Okay.
Well, I mean, it's just a very safe environment to go through these emotions. So we used a lot of the kind of ambient things that we can control in a game to kind of induce these emotions, or I guess if you're already experiencing them, it would be a lot easier to do that. But it's just a safe way to deal with these emotions, and then they will end when you finish the event, so you're not really trapped there, and you have a lot of chances to go back and try things differently.
Just a suggestion. You might want to use this as a way to inform people about the grieving process. So if they're experiencing it, maybe this is a way to show them this is a visual representation of what you might be feeling, but here's, you know, ways you can cope. Maybe it's more of an educational experience on top of that mindfulness experience that you're creating.
Okay, just address that really fast, sorry. And so one feature we didn't really incorporate into the game, but we had planned out, was a more exploratory feature. So you could visit these events, you could kind of go into these options and choose, hey, I want to follow these 3, 4, 5 stories along the paths and finish it. Or you could have more exploratory mechanism. So games like Journey, Shape of the World, kind of more open world roaming things where you go and you just do very cathartic activities, very calming things. And you could choose, the player could choose to go and do those things rather than follow the events linearly. And that's just relaxing.
Can I add one thing even though I'm not a judge? I just wanted to make a comment regarding Leona's initial question. So your best bet for something like this, and I could actually see a lot of potential in this, is to actually partner up with counseling centers. So instead of just posting it on Steam and tagging it, you know, and his comment, like if you actually add additional elements to this to actually help counsel people, this could become a powerful tool, but it's not for sort of like general distribution. This could be, you know, done in partnership with hospitals and counseling centers and places like that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you to that. Oh, yeah, questions?
Do we have time for one more?
Is it quick?
I have a question for your art director. Can you speak a little bit as to why you chose the particular colors and themes to represent the different emotions? And then as an extension of that, can I please ask why the only things you changed were the colors and lighting? Because I would imagine that for like an angry landscape, maybe your trees could be spikier. There's a lot of like visual or exploratory elements that you could really add.
There'll be time for
General
That's a good
statement.
question. In terms of just the landscape changing, we simply ran out of time. But actually, Colin was the one who chose the color scheme, and real quick.
Yeah, I was the assistant art director. And yeah, I chose this color scheme just because I went through kind of an art palette generator and kind of tuned in what do I feel when I see it out different pictures and said, hey, this picture, what does this feel to me? And I'm someone who's gone through some mental illness issues in my life. I'm sure there's, I think I counted the number of people here, there's I think 7 people in here in total who, out of about 50 people, who would be part of the demographic. 20% of people go through that in their lifetime. And so to me, I just kind of picked colors that I thought, hey, this is kind of the emotion I feel. And
There's some research you can find that can help you with that.
Right, there were some palettes that I went through, I was like, oh, this is a sad palette, but yeah.
Thank you again, Team Big Old Tree.